So you heard actually what the president said. President Obama tried this. It didn't work. Is that true? Did you try and it didn't work?
We have in the past deployed Guard reserves to the southern border, but because of the law against what we refer to as a posse comitatus, a law enacted in 1878, the military on the border can only serve in supporting roles. When you say sending the military to the southern border, it conjures up an image of members of the Army with rifles and bayonets standing on the Rio Grande. It's not how it works. Under the law, the most that the military can do is support the Border Patrol. And we've had Guard and reserves there for a period of years, and there's only a limited amount they can do down there. It sounds good to say I'm sending the military down there. It's a good bumper sticker, but there are longer term issues that we need to address with illegal migration from Central America. And so this administration is doing and saying a number of things with the obvious purpose of trying to deter this caravan from coming. But we've got to address the push factors in Central America, the poverty and the violence in Central America that's driving them up here in the first place.
Which raises the question, what should be done? Because as we look at that video, it is disturbing to see thousands of people streaming up saying they're going to come across the border. By the way, it's not the first time this has happened. This is not a unique
No, it's not the first time it's happened.
So if sending military down there isn't the answer, what is the answer?
So, look, we are a sovereign nation. We have to enforce border security. That was my responsibility for 3 years. In my judgment, the answers are these. More immigration judges, so we move these cases through the system faster, not a period of years. More border security, and we've made an investment in border security ever since the Clinton administration, which has led to a pretty dramatic reduction in the number of illegal border crossers. But in addition to that, support to Mexico so that they can enforce border security on their southern border. Then, in addition to that, establish in the region alternatives for these migrants who are desperate to leave these three countries, other countries in the region with their own asylum refugee resettlement process, as well as direct investments in these countries to try to address with them the poverty and the violence that they face. This is the most violent region of the world right now. And so these migrants, these women and children, these families are making the basic calculation, it's safer if I leave than if I stay. And there's only so much you can do on our southern border to deter that.
So as you know well, the administration, the current administration has, if anything, gone the other direction. President Trump has said the solution is let's cut off aid to places like Honduras and Guatemala. And in fact, even in their proposals for aid, they've cut them something like 36% in the new proposal of aid. What kind of position does that put Guatemala, Honduras, and for that matter, Mexico in? Because these people right now are in Mexico.
Well, I think there should be aid to these countries with considerable strings attached to directly address the poverty, the violence, the corruption in those countries. It's something we simply have to do because of the overwhelming push factors that are driving these families north. I also believe that there is a lot more we can do with Mexico to encourage them. This is something we did in the previous administration, and it had considerable success. But the lesson learned, and I lived this problem for 3 years, is that you can do certain things for border security that may send a short-term effect, a short-term downturn. But so long as the underlying conditions in those countries exist, the pattern is always going to revert back. And that's what President Trump and his folks are seeing right now in 2018 with these record high numbers.
On Saturday, there was a tragic shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue outside of Pittsburgh. Which causes all of us to ask, what happened? How could it be avoided? The rabbi, actually, of that synagogue spoke up today on CNN. This is what he had to say about the language being used by our leaders.
I said to our elected leaders that you're our leaders. We turn to you. You're the models for our country. When you speak words of hate, when you speak ill of the other candidate, any words of hate, Americans listen to you. They get their instructions from you. When you speak words of hate, you say to them, this is okay. You can do it as well.
You've studied these things.
The rabbi has it exactly right.
Well, I was going to ask, is there a direct connection between the rhetoric being used and the violence?
Well, one can never know whether there's really a direct connection because it depends upon the intent of the assailant. But no doubt, the tragic events in Pittsburgh on Saturday and the attempted pipe bombings the previous week come in a climate of toxicity, uncivil dialogue right now, and so we have these deranged individuals who feel it's their place to try to bring about change with an assault rifle or with pipe bombs. And so it is incumbent, as the rabbi said, on our leaders to tone down the rhetoric from the president on down. He's got the biggest microphone. President on down to tone down the rhetoric, restore civility in our political debates in this election season. You got to look at the bigger picture, and our political leaders, I think, are in a position to make dramatic change in the level of civility in our dialogue.
And what about our security organizations, such as the Department of Homeland Security? To what extent can we track this and prevent it? I mean, the number of hate groups that actually is rising in this country again after a slight dip a few years back. It's rising again. We monitored the Southern Poverty Law Center has monitored those fairly carefully. And we see with respect to even this shooting and the mailing of the bombs that, in fact, they were on social media. And maybe somebody should pick up on it. Did you monitor those things? Can you monitor them? Is it realistic?
Well, there is a limited amount the government can and should do to try to limit or edit speech, political debate in this country. That's a dangerous road in a free society like ours. What we do is we have missions, we have initiatives for countering violent extremism. We should be funding groups at the local level dedicated to countering violent extremism, deterring violence, deterring someone who may be going in the wrong direction. But ultimately, it's up to internet service providers, social media providers, to track and eliminate on their platforms hate speech, people, organizations that incite violence, that incite terrorism. But in this country, because of the First Amendment, because of free speech, security agencies, particularly my old agency, ought to be careful about jumping into trying to edit content.
And are those internet service providers doing everything they should be doing? I mean, even Twitter, I'll name them for the moment. There are others as well, but Twitter with the bomber, who sent the bombs to the mail, and it turns out that he had been tweeting things that might have indicated he was up to this.
It's a big job, no doubt, and I believe that a number of these companies have made great strides, but there's a lot more to do. In a way, it's like chasing shadows because it's so prevalent now. But I think that this is vital, and I think that they have to keep at it.
We have an election coming up a week from today. There's a lot of concern around the country, and there have been polls done showing people are very concerned about the security of our election process, in large part because of what happened last time we had an election, and it turns out the Russians certainly were doing everything it could to tamper with it. What can the government do to protect us?
First, none of this should be a reason not to vote. Every person should vote. In our democracy, your vote counts. State election officials have made strides over the last 2 years in election infrastructure cybersecurity. They got something of a late start. Some states are better than others. But this, too, is something where we have to be vigilant and we have to keep after it. I believe the bigger issue is fake news and extremist views out there.
And that's a difficult one, given the First Amendment.
Correct.
I mean, how can the government help us on that?
Well, again, the government can track this, but I don't believe that the government should be in the business of limiting or eliminating or banning forms of political speech. I think it's up to the internet service providers, social media providers, to ban things that violate their terms of service.
Back when I was in law school, we used to say that the only solution for bad speech...
I'm being interviewed by a recovering lawyer.
Yeah, recovering lawyer, exactly right. I still have my bar card. But we used to say that the only real remedy to bad speech is more speech, not less speech. And so, for example, could the government require that we know the source of the things we're reading in social media, and then we can take into account ourselves whether we want to believe it or not?
I think insisting on attribution, authentic attribution, will go a long way to reducing hateful speech, encouraging violence. Whether that's up to the service provider or the government, I think is an interesting question. First, I think it is up to the social media provider, the internet service provider, to insist on that.
What's the one thing you'd have us do to help us overcome this challenge with our elections?
Ensure that all vote counting, vote reporting is offline, is off the internet. That's a best practice. Have redundancies, paper redundancies, audits. There are a number of things that election officials should be doing.